Welcome back. Now before I share step one of this really powerful process with you, I'd firstly like to give you a little bit of background context about why this is such a significant thing for me at a personal level. See, for me, growing up, my biggest weakness was my ability to learn, particularly when it comes to my scholastic performance, my academic achievement. I was a really low performing student. I kind of deep down knew that I wasn't entirely dumb. It's just that for whatever reason, I didn't learn the way that my teachers were teaching me. In that classroom, typical kind of environment, that just wasn't the way that I learnt. And so at an older age, I had to learn how to learn. I had to teach myself how to learn in ways that I wasn't being taught. Now, eventually I got the hang of it, as you can see by all the degrees on the wall behind me. In fact, I like to display them with a bit of pride because for me, that's something where I had to learn how to turn my weakness into my strength. But the catch was it wasn't just about learning the skills of learning how to understand things academically. For me, I also had to undo or repair that damaged part of my identity. Try and imagine what it's like for almost 2 decades during those crucially developmental years of my life, just having that message reinforced over and over again. You know, you're no good at maths, no good at literacy, no good at assignments, exams, homework, just not a good student, you know, through exam results, assignments, teacher feedback, report cards. So even when it came time for me to try to learn how to improve my academic skills, not only was that list of cans severely missing the ability to learn academically in the child's list, but the inner parent part of me had also developed a rule saying you're not allowed to do that, okay? Because it soaked up the message from the environment around me. See, that inner parent works essentially, its goal is to try to protect the child. Okay, so the inner parent says, well, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to try or put in any effort because if you do, you'll fail. And if you fail, then you'll be hit hard with the pain of not only humiliation, but of disappointment. So to protect the child, it has that strong voice saying, you can't, you're not allowed to do that. Now, even students who are pretty high achievers still get hit with procrastination and poor motivation at times. So try and imagine what it was like as a very low achieving student my whole life, then trying to go as an adult into university, surrounded by all these students who were complaining about it being hard, but really had no idea what it was like to live their whole life with the identity of a scholastic failure. I guess the good thing to come out of it was that in the process, I learnt certain strategies, certain techniques that I guess my teachers, as good as their intentions were, just weren't aware of, just didn't know how to teach young learners. Because I had to go through that experience for myself, because I had to learn the steps and the strategies and the techniques for myself, I also learnt how to implement them when dealing with other people, when teaching other people not only how to teach their own students and motivate their students or their employees or whoever it is that they're responsible for training and motivating, but I also learnt how to teach other people how to implement those strategies for themselves. And so, as a result of learning through my own experience, I was actually inspired to create my own private tuition company. And I'm proud to say that to this day, my company has a team of almost 200 professional tutors across Australia that I've recruited and trained and motivated and taught how to not only help their students improve their skills, but most importantly, turn their weaknesses into strengths by building their confidence and becoming autonomous in their learning. My team includes school teachers, including principals, even doctors, lawyers, psychologists, accountants, engineers, academics, rocket scientists, high achievers in all areas of academic disciplines who we've recruited to come on board and taught them these particular strategies and techniques. Essentially, our goal is to teach students how to achieve their full potential, knowing from my own personal experience how many students slip through the cracks, not because they're dumb or unable to learn, but simply because the way that they're being taught is not necessarily the way that they learn best. In fact, during my own personal experience, I kind of almost become obsessed with this idea of knowing that people rarely reach their full potential, not because they're not capable, but simply because their experience, especially at a younger age, has simply conditioned them so that their identity almost doesn't realize what they're truly capable of. And in the process, I learnt the techniques of understanding how to make those changes to not only help myself, but others achieve their full potential. And in the process, I learned that it's not just about me teaching my tutors how to communicate and interact with their students, but more importantly, teaching my tutors how to communicate and interact with those students' parents and teachers so that their parents and teachers will change the dynamic in the way that they communicate with those students, because the impact that parents and teachers have on those students has a much greater impact than the 1 or 2 hours a week that that tutor will have on the student directly. So basically my passion, my experience and my expertise is all about how to alter the dynamic between children and adults, particularly students and teachers and children and parents, in a way so that it enables that child to now kind of come out of their shell and turn their weaknesses into strengths. So once you understand how to get parents and children to communicate differently with each other, you then learn how to be able to do the same to ourselves, because the relationship between our inner parent and our inner child is what essentially creates our unconscious conditioning. So the question then becomes, okay, so how do you affect that communication? What do you get the child to focus on, specifically when it comes to how you praise a child? So what I'm about to share with you some of the strategies that I teach my tutors in dealing with their students and families, but they're strategies that you can implement for yourself to learn how to affect the dynamic of your own inner parent and inner child in a way that's going to help you achieve your full potential as well. To demonstrate this point, let me tell you about some really famous studies by Carol Dweck. Now, Carol Dweck is a University of Standard Professor of Psychology. These studies have been repeated many times, not only in children but in adults as well, and been shown to have very similar results. So what Carol Dweck and her colleagues did was they got a bunch of 10-year-olds in primary school, and they gave them all a series of puzzles that they knew were well and truly within those children's level of ability. Okay, so in other words, they set them up to experience a successful outcome. And so the kids were divided into two separate groups. The kids in group A were taken aside after the puzzle and praised. They were told, you know, look, you've done really well. You must be a really bright kid. You're very intelligent. Good job. The kids in group 2, however, were taken aside and they were praised also, but they were told something slightly different. And I'd like you to see if you can guess what they might have been told instead. Now, what happened next was really interesting. Each child was given the opportunity to do another puzzle, only this time it was a lot harder. Okay, so they were told basically, look, if you like, you can do this other challenge. It's going to be a lot harder, but hey, you know, it's a good opportunity to stretch yourself and to grow and to get better. Among the children in group A who were praised for their intelligence, 67% of them preferred not to do the harder test. Now, that's nothing surprising there. Children will usually prefer the path of least resistance and usually feel pretty resistant to having to step out of their comfort zone. Likewise, our own inner child will be resistant to stepping out of its comfort zone as well, and usually prefer something that it feels is safe, comfortable, familiar, etc. But here's the really interesting part. Among the children in group B who were praised differently, 92% of them actually decided to take on the harder challenge. Now, like I said, children will almost always prefer the path of least resistance. So for 92% of them to actually want to do the harder challenge, something pretty significant is going on here. So what happened next was that all the children were given a much harder task. They were given a puzzle to do that the researchers realised was well and truly outside of their ability range. So in other words, this time they were set up to experience failure. But interestingly, during that challenge, the children in group B, who had been praised differently, they worked harder, they enjoyed it more, and they showed less resistance. Whereas, not surprisingly, the children in group A, who'd been praised for their intelligence, did what most kids do, was that they became frustrated and they gave up easily. If there is one recurring pattern that we see over and over again in our private tuition business with parents coming to us wanting a tutor, it's that their children get frustrated and give up too easily. That's what happens. That's essentially the hurdle that they face that's stopping them from getting where they want to be. They get frustrated and they give up too easily, and I think that's something that we can all associate with when it comes to challenging ourselves to step out of our comfort zone and make the change that we've been trying to make. But either way, all children failed that test. They all experienced failure at that point. But what they wanted to see was, what impact would that experience of failure have on them moving forward? So, in the final test, they gave them another puzzle, this time the exact same difficulty level as the original puzzle that they had all had success with. And interestingly, the children in Group B who had been praised differently, they scored on average 30% higher than they did in the original test, even though it was the exact same difficulty level. That experience of failure had actually caused them to get stronger. They bounced back harder. But interestingly, the children in Group A who'd been praised for their intelligence, well, they scored on average 20% lower than the exact same difficulty level they'd previously had success with. You see, it's not true that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Sometimes it can make us stronger, but evidently sometimes it can make us weaker. Sometimes those painful experiences of failure actually make it even more difficult for us to move forward. But the interesting thing is now we can actually pinpoint those pivotal moments in determining what's the difference between whether an experience of failure will make us stronger or whether it will make us weaker. Now, those kids in Group A were praised the way that most children are praised. But the thing is that the way that we are both praised or criticised as we're growing up tends to sort of program that inner parent, so then we continue to praise or criticise ourselves in the same way as we move throughout life. When those children were praised for their intelligence, they were temporarily conditioned with what's called a fixed mindset. Now, a fixed mindset refers to the sort of the assumption or unconscious presupposition that the way we are is the way we always will be. That whether you're good or bad at something is just fixed. Okay? And most people go through life with a fixed mindset, which is why most people will pursue strengthening their strengths but avoid their weaknesses. This is the way I explain it to my tutors when I'm training them. So imagine you've got a child in primary school and you said, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? What would you like to be? And in that moment, a boy or girl, say for example, they want to be a pilot. Okay, but in that same moment they answer that question, momentarily their mind is going to search through their past experiences to determine their identity. Okay, the inner child will look at what's on its list of cans as determined through its experiences. And let's say, for example, this child's past experiences have taught them that they're no good at maths. So in that same moment that they want to give the response, I want to be a pilot, the inner child looks through past experiences, sees no good at maths, and so then when the mind looks into the future, the inner parent kicks in and says, no, you're not allowed to do that. So what you'll see is a child that goes, well, I'd love to be a pilot, but I'm no good at maths, so I guess I can't be a pilot. The opposite of a fixed mindset is what they call a growth mindset. So let's say this time you find a child with a growth mindset and you ask them the same question, only they've had the exact same past experience. So once again, they go, well, I'd love to be a pilot, but, and then their mind searches past experience, sees that maths is not on the list of cans, so they go, well, I'm no good at maths. But this time, when they look into the future, their inner parental voice has been programmed very differently. So rather than their inner parent saying, you're not allowed to do that because if you try, you'll fail, you'll be humiliated, you'll experience the pain of disappointment, etc. Their inner parental voice, this time, is the voice of permission. So what they'll do is say, well, I'm no good at maths, so therefore, I guess I'm going to have to get good at maths. If you want to change your identity on the inside, then you need to get your inner child's list of cans to start to incorporate the things that your mind currently sees as a weakness. But the only way you're going to be able to do that is to get that inner parental voice to stop saying, no, stay there, stay safe, you're not allowed to do that, but instead start to become the voice of permission. And the only way to do that is to develop what's called a growth mindset. So how do you do that? Well, it all comes down to what you focus on and specifically how you praise yourself. So here's the question. That group B of children, how were they praised differently? What were they told that had such a profound impact on how they went on to perform?
The inner parent's role is to protect the child from vulnerable feelings such as disappointment and failure. This is why we often feel enormous resistance when confronting our weaknesses. We know that the way to get children to reach their full potential is by changing the communication dynamic they have with their parents and teachers. Likewise, we need to reprogram the dynamics between our own inner parent and inner child to reach our full potential as well. Research has shown that praising children for things like intelligence creates a fixed mindset, which makes them more resistant, faster to give up, and will regress following the experience of failure. Children with a growth mindset, however, become less resistant, more resilient, and grow stronger following struggle and failure. In the following lesson, Stuart will reveal to you how to use praise differently in order to create a growth mindset, not just in other people, but most importantly, within yourself.